Now, one of the great literary minds of the last century is said to have his own words taken away from him. Roald Dahl. Classics such as Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, Matilda and the BFG captured the heart and imagination of children for generations, and it happened in their most formative years. But now, Roald Dahl's estate and publisher are set to make hundreds of changes to these books to make them more suitable for the modern age. These are some of the examples. Augustus Gloop will no longer be fat. He will only be enormous. The terms crazy and mad have been removed to completely avoid mental health triggers, and references to colours have been changed as well to avoid controversy altogether. Joining me live is New York Times best-selling children's author Christopher Paolini. Thanks so much for your time. Now, your books have sold millions of copies worldwide, and we thank you for your time today. What is your reaction? What was your immediate reaction when you heard that this was happening?
Outrage, quite honestly. I think it's exactly the wrong approach to take to any sort of issue along these lines. They could have put a warning at the beginnings of the books if they felt that was necessary. They could have even issued new editions that said they are being reimagined. But to fundamentally alter the primary editions, the primary sources of Roald Dahl's words and stories, is, I think, really going a step too far, several steps too far. In some ways, it's actually worse than banning a book.
Yeah, I think so as well, because in a way, Christopher, it's rewriting history.
It really is. And if we as a society decide that an author is no longer worth reading, then he's no longer worth reading. But to try to whitewash or alter, his actual words without his consent, I might add, consent is an issue here also. It just really is horrible. And the worst thing is then you could have someone who falls in love with these books and never knows what the original wording was, and goes around saying, I love this author, and someone who knows what his original words are might be thinking, no, he's a horrible author and you're a horrible person for liking him. Either way, it's a no-win situation, and I think that this was exactly the wrong way to go about it.
Christopher, as someone who, as I mentioned, has sold millions of books, and as an avid reader myself, I think it's really robbing the next generation of a window into the times. These are fictional characters. They are fictional writings from Roald Dahl. And they were written at a certain period in time, and his language conveys what was happening in that time in a really subtle way.
Absolutely. And Dahl is a prickly, eccentric, interesting writer. And these changes are, just from a strictly literary point of view, not really good writing. If you look at the list of changes, they make the descriptions much more vague. They are much less elegant. You lose alliteration. You lose all sorts of interesting things in the language. And it's like we're going to be giving a subpar product to our children, assuming, again, that they are going to be reading these books and saying this is the best that Dahl could do, when it's not. Are there parts of it that might be a little offensive for some people? Maybe. But, that's life. And that actually is a good opportunity for further conversations with your children or anyone else who's reading books.
What's the corrosive effect? What kind of corrosive effect does this have on writers now? That instead of, giving way to their creativity, does it kind of put this shackle on you as you're trying to write? Because you're like, well, am I going to upset anyone here?
Absolutely, especially for new writers.
Yeah.
When you're trying to establish yourself in the industry, writers tend to second guess themselves anyway, and this sort of movement really only exacerbates the problem, to the point where I've even seen people on my Twitter feed saying, I've wanted to be a writer and now I don't feel like I can do this without being torn to shreds. And that's just not a good way to have our culture exist and move forward and have this sort of dialogue.
I mean, I've often said in recent times that being a comedian is one of the most dangerous jobs you can have these days. I feel like being a writer, particularly a fictional writer, is becoming that way as well. Do you feel like that?
It can be, but I think people should have the courage to stand by their own words. Having professional grievance seekers being employed to pick through every piece of work and find everything that could possibly offend someone somewhere. It's not a great way to have art develop and to support our literary world. That really bothers me. If you write something that is really offensive, then own up to it and you change it yourself. And Roald Dahl did that himself when he changed the Oompa Loompas from what they originally were, which was pygmies, into the current version.
That's
Yes,
right.
he
I
did.
forgot that. So he changed from pygmies to Oompa Loompas, but now in this, again, this other rewrite, they will be removed. Are they going to still be called Oompa Loompas or short people?
Still Oompa Loompas, but
Okay.
they've changed even more references to them and more of their backstory, which just reduces the pleasure of those books and the effect that Dahl was going toward, which is happening without his consent and with none of the artistry that he employed in his writing.
Christopher, you're so right. And thanks so much for talking to us about this today, because it is so hard to see how you can stop these kind of changes. But I guess we've just got to keep on having the conversation. So thank you.
Absolutely. My pleasure.